Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, journalist and author Sam Baker. My guest for the first episode of this season is a very special one. You may not have heard of Karen Arthur, but you sure as hell will have done by the time she's finished with you. Because Karen, the founder of Menopause Whilst Black, is a woman on a mission.
People fear menopause. They're worried about getting older, not being desirable, not being seen as relevant, all of that stuff. But that doesn't stop just because you hit menopause. If anything, it gives you the courage to really step out because you've got nothing to lose, you know?
For the first 3 decades of her working life, Karen was a teacher. Then she had a breakdown that caused her to rethink everything about her life. Sound familiar? She recreated herself as a fashion designer, activist, campaigner, model, and set about giving black menopausal women a much-needed voice. Join Karen and me for an eye-openingly honest and generous conversation about what can happen when you hit a wall and don't even know who you are anymore. Before we start talking about how you got to where you are, I need to know what the picture is behind your head.
Right, so that's London Contemporary Dance Theatre.
Oh, it's beautiful.
A poster from 1992. And that person there, the black woman, she's a friend of mine. My background's in dance.
Oh, is it? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I used to travel down to London from Leicester, which is where I was at uni, and watch amazing shows at the old Sadler's Wells. In the Gods, where the seats were so small, you left with your knees bruised.
Yeah, and you kind of felt like if you leaned too far forward, you were going to just fall into the precipice.
Yeah, absolutely, with those little binoculars that we always used to nick.
Oh God, the days of nicking ashtrays and binoculars are gone, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I'd kept them as well. I never kept them. I haven't even got any to
show for it. Oh God, I think I hate to say the word journey seriously, but
I know.
You know, it is what it is, isn't it?
It is.
It is. I think it's really going to resonate with so many people because you were a teacher, weren't you?
Yes. I was a teacher for a long time. I fell into it. It wasn't a calling. I don't want to say it was something that I felt I had to do. So I studied. My art teacher was encouraging me to do art, and I wanted to go to university. I lived in a small town in Oxfordshire, and I felt like there was something bigger. I wanted to burst out. But none of my friends really went to uni, and I didn't want to do art. And I always danced. I was the disco dancer. I was the one in the middle of the dance floor, you know, having a great time. And I'd done a few shows at school. We had a great dance teacher. And then he said to me, "You can do a performing arts degree." So I played the piano, and I was very dramatic. And so when he said I could do a performing arts degree, I was like, yeah, I'm on that. So I applied for a dance degree at Laban Centre in London, and I applied for a performing arts degree in Leicester, and I got into both. And the only reason I went to Leicester was because they were offering accommodation and we were too worried about where I was going to live in London. And it was the best choice because it was a wider experience of performing arts and I loved it. And then when I graduated, I faffed about a bit. I was doing some teaching, some freelance teaching. And then I took a job at a Quaker school near my hometown, teaching dance. And when I'd done that for a year, I thought I should probably get some kind of qualification. So I did my postgrad, you know, and from my postgrad, I just kept going. I moved to London. I got a job with ILEA in the London Education Authority, and they put me in a school in Langdon Park School. And I haven't looked back, actually. I loved it. I loved teaching dance. I loved swanning around in my pink jumpsuit. I loved the kids that I taught. Yeah, it was lovely.
How old were you when you had that kind of moment of, it's been described as a breakdown, but also as a breakthrough? Tell me about what happened.
Yeah, I've done 28 years of teaching and I couldn't see myself leaving. That's part of growing older. You don't understand your transferable skills. And also I was taught to look for a job. I thought I'm going to have to look for another job and I couldn't work out what I was qualified to do. Plus, I was single, big mortgage, 2 girls at uni.
Oh God,
you know,
a lot of
lifestyle to upkeep. And I was sewing, I was making bags. I had a little business that really was a hobby because I was making no money and I wasn't that bothered about it because I had a salary. That makes sense. So I was doing that. That was more of a cathartic exhale at the
Mm.
weekends, and I did like crafts shows and open houses and things like that. So I was 52. I think I was 52. My memory isn't what it was, you know.
I know, tell me about how old are you now?
I'm
Sorry.
58 now. I'm
58
58
now.
now. So I must have been 52, yeah, if I do the math. Both my girls went to university. One went back to university and one went for the first time. It was September 2014. And in fact, I had been on holiday, I'd been to visit my family in Barbados. I'd hit the ground running when I got back 1st of September. There was a fashion event in my local area called Forest Hill Fashion Week. So I was frantically designing and making to put things there. So the first 2 weeks I was going to work, coming home, sewing, you know, getting up, doing it all over again. And I was busy. And then the minute that finished and the day started to get darker and my girls weren't home and we move into winter, and I really started to wobble because I thought, oh, I've got the house to myself. I'm going to love it. And I actually hated it. I hated the quiet. I hated coming home in the dark. My boiler broke. And
Typical.
yeah. And that's a lot of money to replace. And
Oh, yeah.
actually, I realise now that that's a measure of how I felt about myself. I was moving into depression without knowing it. Had my girls been around, I would have fixed that boiler in a heartbeat, you know? But because it was just me, it was almost like I didn't feel worthy of having heat, if that makes sense. I would literally run from room to room and I've got like a nice fireplace in my living room, sit there with my blanket over me, with the heating on, the TV on mute, sit at my laptop and do whatever work I needed to do. And I was losing my pull to sew. The one thing that had kept me sane, I would say, was the one thing that I wasn't really bothered about doing. So the story is that I was in a meeting and I was half listening in the meeting, but also had my laptop open and I'm answering emails and multitasking, which doesn't really serve anyone, but there you go. You do it because you
we
have
all
to.
do it, don't we? Yeah.
And I was mentally calculating when the meeting would finish and how much time I would have to stay in my office to finish some more work before I would go home and do some more work.
Yeah, God, you know. It sounds nuts now, doesn't it?
I know. And do you know what? I look back on my life then, I don't know how I did it. And you do it because you have to. And the fire alarm went and I snapped because, of course, when the fire alarm goes, you're supposed to go outside, aren't you? You're supposed to do as you're told.
Yeah.
It wasn't conscious. Everybody was going down. I marched up to my office, grabbed all my things, grabbed my laptop and marched home and went into my living room, put the heating on, put the TV on and opened my laptop and carried on working. And then I did a couple of hours and I looked up and I was exhausted.
Yeah.
That kind of tired that gets in your bones, that I was so tired and I was so desperate to go to bed. And it was only 8 o'clock and something in me said I couldn't go to bed at 8 o'clock because it was too early.
Because it's 8 o'clock, yeah.
Right. But also I realised if I went to bed, the next minute I knew it'd be the morning again and I'd have to get up and I'd have to do it all over again. And I burst into tears.
Oh.
And it's a pivotal moment because I remember it like it was yesterday. But I'm crying and I'm Googling symptoms of depression. I go on the NHS website and it's got a tick box and I'm ticking away and I'm still crying and I haven't stopped. And I start to scroll through my phone and think, I need to call someone. This is not good. I didn't want to call my kids because they would worry. I wasn't going to call my mum. I didn't want to call my sister because these are people who would worry about me. And also they're not near me. So I called a friend who lives, 5 minutes away in the car. A good friend. And normally she doesn't pick up the phone. Whenever I call her house phone, her kids pick up or her husband picks up. It just so happened she picked up the phone and I'm sobbing talking and she can't make any sense of what I'm saying, of course. And she said, stay there, I'm coming. And even though at the time I didn't realise it, it was the beginning of my journey, my pathway towards leaving teaching because I had some time off and I was trying to get better to go back to work because that's what you do. I didn't know anything else.
No, you just go straight back into the treadmill, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And I made a decision not to go back to work. And that gave me the space to get worse, by the way. It wasn't the magic cure I assumed it was going to be, but it also meant that I could get better for me. And I could turn my entire gaze for the first time in my life on myself, which I'd never done, which many women don't do. We don't do it.
No, how hard was that after a lifetime of not putting yourself first to do that.
I didn't have any choice. Sam, I didn't have any choice. I was in a state, I didn't realise all these years I did have a choice, but I put everybody else first. I put my kids first. When I split from my partner mid-2000s, I put them first. They were the people I prioritised. And I thought that putting them first was working as hard as I could to save more money, to chip away at my massive
Yeah.
like in tiny increments, so I thought I was putting myself first, but I wasn't by any stretch of the imagination. So I left, and it went very quiet, really quiet, because that busyness that we're conditioned into,
Yeah.
when people contact you, say, "Oh, I'm so busy. I'll see what I fit you into my diary." It's almost like a badge of honour.
It's an addiction, isn't it?
Yeah, because that's what we're taught. And I said to you before, I don't know how I did it, except that I did it because that's what you do. And now my life is so different because I make choices about whether I want to be busy or not,
Yeah. Looking back with everything that you know now, do you think that was the onset of perimenopause?
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to somebody yesterday about it. They're not remembering the stuff that I kept in my head. I thought I was going mad, and I'd never heard of perimenopause.
Really? Because it's every woman. I've spoken to so many women now. I spoke to 50 women for the book, and, about 20 now for the podcast. And every single one of them had, varying degrees of mental health symptoms, and nobody knew. All anybody knew was the hot flush thing. That kind of cliche of the hot, sweaty, slightly puffy middle-aged woman. Nobody knew. I didn't know at all.
Yeah. There is a shift, literally, where it's not funny anymore. It's not the joke. We were the butt of jokes. And even I went to the doctors in February 2015. And I don't go to the doctors often. I don't.
No. How long after your breakdown was that?
So that's 6 months later, 5 months later, but I was still in it. But because other things were happening and I was really worried at that time, I was still concentrating on trying to get back to work. I go to the doctors. I always have a list on my phone so I don't miss anything out because they've only got the 5 minutes, haven't they? 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I want to get it all in.
And you're literally going, and this,
right.
And that.
And depression was at the bottom of it.
Oh, man, Karen.
I know. Because I'd fallen, I had an injury, and I wanted to go to the holistic route. So I was basically rocking up to the doctor to say, this is what's wrong and this is what I'm going to do. I'm just letting you know, just in case. But also she didn't make the connection between depression and menopause. So I wasn't making the connection. I thought they were separate things. I will also say that I had started hot flushes. I'd got my new boiler at Christmas. I started having hot flushes and I thought it was the boiler's fault. I was in complete denial, even though I hadn't had a period for a year. My mum started menopause at 52. The signs were there, but my head was elsewhere.
Yeah.
If the doctor had said, oh, well, there is a connection between blah, 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 I would have been able to go, oh, yeah, right, you're right. But because my head was elsewhere, I just knew I was forgetting everything. As my job as a head of house in a busy, massive, boys' school, I had to remember a lot of things. I wrote a lot of stuff down, but I didn't really have to. I was that woman who just knew what the nuances around parents and why certain kids couldn't sit together and, who I had to call and that kind of thing. And so
you were the one everybody turned to and relied on.
Right, which made it hard to delegate, of course. It was scary, and because no one was talking about it, no one, and no one who looked like me was talking about it, on top of that, I thought it was just me, so I kept it to myself.
Well, the doctor didn't associate it with menopause, so did you take anything? Did you get any treatment?
Okay, so she suggested antidepressants.
Oh, God. If I had a tenner, honestly, if I had a tenner for everyone who said that, I would be a lot richer than I am now.
She wasn't pushy about it, but she just mentioned it. And I said to her, as I said to you, I'd go to the doctors to tell them what I'm going to do. And every now and then they'll say, painkillers. And I'm not a fan of painkillers. I'm not a fan of drugs per se. Anyway, so she mentioned antidepressants. I said, okay, I haven't ruled it out. I won't rule it out. But let me try some other stuff first. And I was still at work at this point. But then I left a couple of months later and it gave me the space to do the things, to try different, more holistic things. So I went to a herbalist and she gave me a deliciously icky concoction that included things like black cohosh and,
Yeah.
the stuff, right?
Did you find any of that stuff work?
Yeah. I want to say I had an hour's consultation and then half an hour with this woman listening to me talk about all the stuff that was happening, all the stuff. It wasn't therapy, that came later, but I think sometimes it might be a combination. Certainly for me, I can't put my hand on heart and say, yeah, that worked. But that feeling of being held and somebody holding space for me, it's absolutely, it's invaluable. So there was that. My brother, who is a Buddhist, suggested meditation. And I thought, it's a bit airy-fairy, if I'm honest. He recommended a book by John Kabat-Zinn, Full Catastrophe Living, which I still haven't finished, but it's really good. The bits I read were good. It's massive and it's expensive, so if you can borrow it from somebody, do so. And that was also to help with my injury because my back and my leg were hurting. I was having difficulty walking, which is somebody my background is in dance was actually, it's awful anyway, but it felt doubly awful, I suppose. So there was that. I got silent. I had nothing to do.
Yeah. When you've been busy your whole life, you don't even know what to do you?
I tell you what was hard. I live near the school I used to teach. So I would hear all the kids going to school every day. And I would have to hide in my room and put earplugs in or do something else so I couldn't hear them. I found that really hard because I can hear the pit. When it's quiet, I can hear the school pips from my house. If I went out, I would deliberately go the long way around so I didn't have to walk past the school. It was triggering.
Yeah. Oh, Karen.
And even now, I was talking on Instagram, if that's what you do, commenting on someone who has just stopped teaching. And I was saying about how problematic I find September, this period. And this is the first year I've remembered beforehand so I can be more gentle and softer with myself. So September was always the time you hit the ground running, you had loads to do. Within 2 days, you'd forgotten you had a holiday. And so when I stopped teaching, of course, in September, all my friends went back to work. And I'm like, Billy, no, mate. Do you know what I mean? I started to book holidays to visit my family in Barbados on the 1st of September, which is when it gets really cheap, by the way. I did that for a few years, a couple of years, I suppose. And then last year I didn't go because my daughter was pregnant with her first child. And this year, obviously, I'm not going. So, well, not obviously, I don't want to get on a plane yet. But this is the first year that I've gone, okay, Karen, September is going to be difficult for you. You must be gentle with yourself. I see that as, that's progress. I'm putting that down as growth.
Massive growth.
Yeah.
So you started your fashion business.
Yes.
What led to that? What made you think this is what I want to do for me?
I was making bags out of Ankara fabrics and I was, I enjoyed doing that. 1 year I decided to make clothes. I gave in to pressure. People kept saying, you should make clothes, you should make clothes, you should make clothes. And the reason I didn't want to is because I decided I'm not a fashion designer because I hadn't got a degree in fashion and I didn't do pattern cutting. So I decided, even though I have been sewing since I was 15 years old.
The classic woman thing. I can't do it because I'm not qualified to within an inch of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't know how to grade the patterns to make them different. So I didn't know any of that stuff. So I held off. And then I thought, I may as well. So I did it for a bit and I'd put different outfits on my website. Strangers would buy them and they'd go off. And then, of course, I had this period where I didn't want to sew at all. So my daughter said to me, why don't you get some help? We're talking a year later now. I did spend a whole year ostensibly not doing a lot. I was doing a lot for myself. I went into therapy, which was fantastic. And I thought I'd go for 6 weeks and ended up going for 3 years. But it was just what I needed. And I haven't ruled out going back. But I wasn't doing anything. So I worked with a business coach, a creative business coach, who actually kind of held my hand all through this. And it was her who said, we were working out what I love doing, and what I love doing is making fashion stories. I love the connection that you get from working with women who have lost themselves a bit. I'm a great hype woman. So as I was learning to redefine my relationship with my fashion and what I wore and learning not to give a... And whilst I was learning that choosing clothing that I loved would get me out of the house, and it didn't matter what the combinations were, whilst I was learning that my aunt had passed away, my Aunt Monica Monica passed away the same year I left teaching. And I missed her terribly, even though we had a connection, but I didn't see her a lot. So the guilt, you can imagine, not being there and all that kind of stuff. But I inherited a couple of her skirts and a bit of jewellery. And I found that when I was feeling at my lowest, wearing her clothing that she'd worn, that somehow had her stories woven into it, helped me to feel better. So all of that I'd be talking about with my business coach and realising that I use fashion to make connections. So I want to make clothing for individuals, not for random people who are going to buy it. Do you know what I mean? Who I don't know.
Yeah.
That combination of meeting someone, talking through what you love about yourself, often what we don't love about yourself, it's often a longer list. Talking about what you love and designing something that is for an event that is going to make you happy, that every time you wear that item, you think about that event and you think about the journey we went on over the 4 to 6 weeks that we were working together. It's priceless. It's absolutely priceless. So I seeded into that. I seeded into creating bespoke clothing for women. I have a leaning towards colour. I have a leaning towards Ankara African print fabrics, but I'm not exclusively about that. So I was brought up, this may resonate with you, to believe that you got a job and you stuck at it and then you retired. And I think that's why I struggled with the whole not leaving teaching thing, is that I thought I'd have to do one thing. Now I do lots of different things because I do what takes my fan. I'm curious. I do what I like to do. And so I love teaching. So I run private sewing lessons in my studio in South East London. I'm modelling at the moment. That's a new thing that's turned up.
Yeah.
That fits into my vision of being visible in a world where there aren't enough Black women with silver locks who are doing what they want to do. So that works for me, Yeah, I'm a big fan of trying things at least once, something.
Not everything. This is all about identity, isn't it? It's all about your identity, losing it and finding it, and maybe finding an identity that had always been there, but had been put aside while everybody else was put to the front. But then also your business is all about helping, because fashion is such a big deal for women, especially, get to around about 40 and you don't know who you are or what you should be wearing or anything. It feels like your business is also all about helping women find their own identity and tell their stories and work out who they are, which is just brilliant.
I feel like I was drawn. I couldn't work out what I wanted to do. I think sometimes we also identify with our job. And I identified as a teacher. I had status as a head of house, as a head of and I struggled with, well, what would I tell everybody I was? Because we always go, what do you do?
Yeah.
And
you don't want to say I used to be, do you?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
And also, so there's that double thing of, my parents are from Barbados. They were brought this. They have colonial education, as many of us do. And so going into jobs that have status and make money, my mum would kind of boast about me. My daughter's in London. She's a teacher, that kind of thing. And I identified very strongly with not wanting to disappoint her. My late Aunt Monica wanted me to go back to university. I wasn't really keen on it, but education is so important. So couple that with the fact that I couldn't see myself as a fashion designer. I actually ended up getting called out about it. I had a promo video made that's on my website. And all the time I was describing myself as a bespoke designer. And a good friend of mine who is a fashion designer called me out in public on it and said, you're not a bespoke designer, you're a fashion designer. I felt like I couldn't own that title. I own it now. In fact, I call myself a fashion creative because I feel that opens myself out to doing all sorts of creative things that are based in fashion. But at the time, it was hard. But it is about finding your purpose. It's a bit of a cringy phrase, but it's true. I've drawn towards helping women, empowering, all those buzzwords, women, just by being who I am, to do whatever they want to do as well.
And that's kind of where Menopause Well Black has come from, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hashtag. So, because, I'm conscious that as a straight white woman who's worked in the media, I have, a massive privilege. And I couldn't find myself You know, when I was going through menopause, probably around about the same time as you, about 6-7 years ago,
Yeah.
I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know where to look. All I noticed was that women over 40 kind of vanished, certainly over 50. So for you, finding the menopause information and then finding it from people who, you know, look like you, even worse.
Yeah. And it is
Nowhere
that
to look.
invisible woman. We're either the butt of people's jokes, the mother-in-law jokes, or we became invisible. Society does a number on us. The media does a number on women. It's about, because it's around how you look, how we look. The emphasis is on you looking youthful. You know, at 20, at 30, I couldn't imagine myself at 50. I thought I'd be dead. You know,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
even
Inconceivably old. Yeah.
absolutely. And my epiphany, if you like, menopause whilst black, was born just after Black Lives Matter, just after George Floyd. It was during COVID, just after George Floyd was murdered.
Was it that recent?
Yeah,
It's
that
really
recent.
taken hold, isn't it?
I know. And it was because I'm sitting at home, I'm making face covers from my kitchen table because I brought my sewing machine home, and I was busy in the sense that I was keeping myself creative and it was stopping me from being anxious. And I was aware that my menopause symptoms weren't going away. And whilst they're not super severe, they still exist. And I was wondering, how are specifically black women who are watching and hearing about people who look like us, our brothers, our sisters, our partners being killed, being arrested, being all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking, your menopause symptoms don't just go on hold whilst you're dealing with another tragedy. You have to deal with all of that. And I was wondering how they were navigating racial trauma. And I went on Instagram and I ranted and I asked the question, if you Google menopause and you click images, what comes up? And people got it, because if you do it, you see a sea of very sad looking white women with their heads in their hands. They don't look like you, and they definitely don't look like me. And so I was saying that there needs to be more representation. My friends, I have black friends who are menopausal. It's not that it doesn't happen, we get it. So I started to do my research, and the research threw up an article from 2007 from Northamptonshire, which was about why black women didn't take up HRT. That's not the title, but it was basically that. And it had 22 women in it, and 15 of them were identified as black women, and 4 of them identified as black British women. And then the rest of the research was African American women. So a lot of stuff from like 2018 kind of thing. The Swan Report, which was about racial trauma and racial weathering, which is the accumulation of microaggressions. There's a lot. I was like, oh, no one's done it, have they? I'm going to have to do it, aren't I? It was that kind of thing. It's like, I'm going to have to step up. So I created something on Google Forms and I asked black menopausal women to fill it in, and 235 women filled it in.
I remember that post. I mean, I didn't realise that was your first one.
That was, yeah. And the thing is that I hadn't planned to do a podcast. I didn't have any plans. I just wanted to know. I mean, a lot of the stuff brings up the fact that black women are more likely to develop menopause 2 years earlier than our white counterparts. We're more likely to have more severe symptoms, but we have a lot of parallels. But there's also things like we're less likely to get osteoporosis because we tend to have a stronger bone density. There's lots of, little things. But the biggest thing that's come out of that research is black women saying, thank you. Thank you for noticing. Thank you for asking. And I knew of one podcast that centres black women. She's in America, the Black Girl's Guide to Menopause. And so I was telling them about that. But that's all I knew. So I thought there needs to be something for UK women. I think I shied away also because I've always felt, again, that you need to be an expert to do stuff. You don't, guys. You just need to have a passion about it. You just need to want to do it. And I feel driven to share these stories and have conversations with women who are doing the same thing, so that's it. That's what's happening. So I'm interviewing, and hopefully once I've worked out what the hell editing is, it'll start coming out in October, just in time for World Menopause Day.
Yeah, October the 18th. Yeah. That's amazing, isn't it? And there's so much need for it.
I don't want a couple of things. My daughters are 25 and almost 30. Everything I do has them in mind. And I never want them to feel the way I felt 6 years ago. I never want them to go through that. I never want them to feel alone. I feel that if young Black women coming up see that 58, they're not going to be dead, or that they're not going to be wearing beige, or that, that they can live vibrant lives the way that they want to on their terms, then it means that there will be less fear. People fear menopause. They're worried about getting older, not being desirable, not being seen as relevant, all of that stuff. But that doesn't stop just because you hit menopause. If anything, it gives you I'd say, the courage to really step out because you got nothing to lose. I feel that every woman should hear stories that resonate with them. And if my story, your story, the stories of the people on my podcast, the women we're talking to resonate, then it's just one more step closer to menopause just being a conversation that everybody has. And by everybody, I mean men and women, the boys we're bringing up, the kids in school, everybody. It's not a problem, but it's not just a women's issue. It's a world issue.
Yeah, I mean, it affects all of us, doesn't it? It might be 51% of the population that have it, but it's 100% of the population who are affected by it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And dealing with it by just like pushing us in the corner and like shutting the door and pretending you can't see us.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it'll be why so many women in their 50s go part-time. And now, like you said, I look back on the struggle I had a few years before I eventually left teaching. Imagine what it would be like if workplaces got it so that they were able to give women much more support, that maybe they could have some kind of sabbatical. Imagine how important and how effective that would be within the workplace, because we lose a lot of talent of women who feel that they just can't do their job anymore. They just need to do it in a different way and be supported to do that.
Our society is so youth focused, isn't it? And so male focused. You just got that classic thing of men who are 50 are silver foxes and CEOs, and women who are 50, just wasted. Yeah. And if ever I've seen a silver vixen, it's you, frankly.
Why, thank you, darling.
Sitting there looking amazing. I wish everybody could see you. That's the only problem with podcasts, is that no one can see.
I'm going to Sainsbury's after this. I'm going to give them, I was like, well, because every day I get up, I dress based on how I feel or how I want to feel. And I was feeling a kind of black and white with a little, red accents today. I have a few dresses that I used to wear with heels and a head wrap for work. They're good quality clothing. I don't wear heels and a head wrap anymore, but they don't fit the person I've become. But I'm wearing this, you can't see. I've got a skirt that my mum made me that's too big for me that I've pinned underneath with a lovely pleated detail. And I've just zhuzhed it up a bit, and now I feel much more like me.
Yeah, you look fantastic. I'm sat here in my usual, dressed like a 10-year-old boy as normal. But, that's me. You're fantastic, Karen, honestly. I think I just hope let's just get the message out more and more and more. Yeah. I've got a few questions that I always ask.
Okay.
What's your emotional age?
I think it's about 15. I'm a giggler, and I remember being told off at school for talking too much and giggling, and it's never, ever left me. And in fact, the kids I remember from school who I've taught, the kids that came into my life that I've remembered are the ones who were the talkers and the gigglers and got in a little bit of trouble for not keeping the mouth shut. So, yeah, it might even be younger.
Everybody likes a bit of a book recommendation. So is there a book that you would push on your friends, a book that you've loved?
I read a lot. I recently finished Candice Brathwaite's I Am Not Your Baby Mother. It really spoke to me. I really loved that. I'm no longer talking to white people about race. Rene Lodge literally turned everything on its head for me. Currently reading Creative Visualization, but I have no idea who it's by. It's about imagining yourself in the life that you want to live, and often that we don't feel that we are worth having everything, and we are.
I think that will really resonate. It was interesting earlier when you said about thinking things were a bit airy-fairy or a bit woo-woo. I was always like that. Yeah. Always dismiss it. Yeah. I'm a cynic. I'm not interested in that. And that's,
This stuff works. My affirmations and getting silent and meditation and all of those things, it's about the way we talk to ourselves. And we often, when we catch ourselves speaking to ourselves, we're actually not very nice.
No,
You know,
you speak to yourself in a way you'd never speak to anyone else.
yeah, we call ourselves stupid. We're terrible. I no longer subscribe to that. I am amazing, and I do a lot of I ams, because I'm just getting started.
I can't wait to see what you do next. What would you tell younger women? What would you like younger women to know?
Don't people please. People pleasing will be the death of you.
How I could not agree more. How old were you when you worked that out?
Oh, probably 53. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not in the habit of regretting any parts of my life. And it's hard not to people please because women are taught to care and women are taught to nurture. So you are thought of being selfish if you don't put yourself on the line for other people. I will say that learning not to people please and really looking at my motive for doing things. Are you doing this because you want that guy to like you? Or are you doing it because you want to do it? They're the things that are easy, So that would be I have lots of advice, but that'll do.
Yeah. Tell me an old bird role model who's inspired you.
The Maya Angelou's of the world, Maya Angelou, of course. God rest her soul. I really like Iris Apfel.
Yeah.
I remember seeing her documentary and I thought, gosh, that's some woman. So yeah, I really like her. I am drawn towards people who live life on their own terms. And usually that often shows in the way that they dress. Not always, but often it shows in the way they dress.
What's your superpower?
Vulnerability.
That is...
You didn't expect me to say that, were you?
I wasn't expecting that, but that is brilliant.
Yeah, vulnerability. The minute I became vulnerable and honest with myself and with other people has become my strength. And I have done more in the last 5 years, I would say, in terms of my growth and where I'm going than I ever did when I was teaching. Even though I was impacting people's lives, it's just different. I was doing that for them. What I'm doing now is my absolute truth. So yeah, vulnerability.
And lastly, how many fucks do you give?
None! I like that question.
Do you know what? Some people say none and I don't believe them, but I believe you.
It's interesting because people assume that if you say you don't give any fucks, it means that you don't care about anything. But that's not what people are saying. You have to work on yourself, don't you? I don't get up every day and feel amazing. I don't get up every day and go, right, I'm going to conquer the world. I tend to find that if I have a busy day, the next day I have to be a lot quieter. So I don't care. I don't care what people think of me. I'm doing what I love, and that'll do. And that happens to be impacting other people as well.
Karen, you are an absolute legend.
Oh,
I think you are my old bird role model.
Oh, I love that. I'm happy to be a role model. I like that. Yeah, man.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can reach me on Twitter @SamBaker and Instagram @TheOtherSamBaker using the hashtag #TheShift. You can hear a new episode of The Shift each week on Acast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please do rate and subscribe because it really does help other people find us.